Republican Party. So this is a brief history of the Republican Party. The Republican Party was formed by anti-slavery Whigs in 1854. The Whig Party was a political party that elected several presidents in the 19th century in the United States, and then it split up, broke up, particularly over the issue of slavery. So in 1854 in Wisconsin, a new party is formed, and the platform of the party is about non-spread of slavery to Western territories. The first candidate for president from the Republican Party was John C. Fremont, the famous explorer and later officer during the American Civil War. There's a street named after him in Las Vegas, and Fremont lost his election, his bid at presidency to James Buchanan in 1856. So this first foray into presidential politics is a loss for Republicans. However, in 1860, the Democratic Party was split three ways between Stephen Douglas, John Bell, and John Breckinridge. This allowed Abraham Lincoln, only the second Republican ever to run for president, to actually win the election. And so Lincoln is the first Republican president. Early on in its history, like I said, Republican platform was against the spread of slavery, and then under Lincoln, the Civil War, putting the Union back together, and then under Ulysses Grant, the Reconstruction period. Over time, Republicans became a party of big business. This is symbolized by Wall Street and Chamber of Commerce metaphor. So when we talk about Wall Street, and when we talk about Chamber of Commerce, we mean more than just literally people who work on Wall Street or who belong to the United States Chamber of Commerce, which is a powerful pro-business interest group. What we mean is everyone in the electorate who identifies with this orientation. This orientation is all about the rising tide of wealth lifting all boats. So what is good for General Motors is good for the United States. Let big business in general, but big business in particular, prosper. And from there, everyone will become rich. In other words, rich will become richer, and so will the poor people. So it's not like rich become richer and poor become poorer. Not at all. People who subscribe to this particular approach, they believe that it benefits everyone when the wealthy become wealthier. So we can clearly see that this orientation is taken by the Republican Party soon after the Civil War and the Reconstruction. And we can already see that very clearly with William McKinley, who was representing the interests of big business, big banks, big railroads. So already by the 1890s, this is very clear that the Republican Party has become a pro-business party. And in the 21st century, the approach of this party is to try to push for lower taxes, fewer regulations, openness to international trade, anything that will grow the economy. So it's a party of freer trade, and it's a party of big business. There's a second wing of the Republican Party, and that's Hawkish Foreign Policy wing. We also see that already emerging with William McKinley, because McKinley was, after all, the president who allowed for annexation of Hawaii. His predecessor, Democrat, did not want to do it. So Republicans over time became the party of imperialism. And after the Second World War, they tried to ramp up that approach, because after all, during the First and Second World Wars, the United States was presided over by Democratic presidents, Woodrow Wilson in World War I, and then Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Harry Truman at the very end of World War II. So as Republicans look for an issue to become more relevant and to try to get back into the White House, we see the emergence of Senator Joseph McCarthy pushing his anti-communist rhetoric, going on witch hunts, trying to find communists after behind every corner in the State Department and Defense Department. So you see the ramping up of pro-militaristic, pro-aggressive foreign policy. And so we can very clearly see that later on with Ronald Reagan, who took the position which was different from his predecessors, both Republican and Democratic. If his predecessors were seeking to contain the Soviet Union, then Reagan sought to defeat the Soviet Union, to roll back the gains that the Soviet Union had following in the aftermath of the Second World War. So Reagan wanted to defeat the evil empire. And we can actually see how that worked out in reality with Reagan and then his successor, George Herbert Walker Bush. We saw the collapse of the Soviet Empire in Eastern Europe and then the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. And then in the 21st century, we saw Republicans becoming neoconservatives in foreign policy with people from the Project for the New American Century leading the ideas of foreign policy under George W. Bush following the attacks of 2001. So George W. Bush, obviously a Republican president, and his policy is very much inspired by the ideas of Donald Kagan, Robert Kagan, Paul Dundas Wolfowitz, Bill Kristol, Richard Armitage, Scooter Libby. So it's a foreign policy which believes in the triumph of American individualism and democracy, of Western-oriented, individualistically based ideology, which logically leads to democracy so as a political form. So individualism as the philosophical approach to life, leading logically to democracy, which is a political structure based on individual preferences. And what existed in North America and Western Europe and Japan had to be spread to parts of the world where it did not yet exist. And we saw how it didn't work out in the Middle East. So the hawkish foreign policy under neoconservatives tried to democratize the Middle East, and that backfired very badly. But we see that Republicans, starting with Donald Trump, are split on foreign policy. While there is still very strong hawkish orientation, there's a second strand, and that's a populistic strand, which says maybe we should, if not isolate, then at least reduce America's participation in global affairs. So it's not quite isolationism, but it's much more populistic judicial interventionism. Let's not rush to impose democracy in other regions of the world. Let's put America first. So on foreign policy, Republicans, as of mid-2020s, are clearly split. The next part of the Republican Party is religious and social conservatives. These become more important starting in the mid-1970s. Prior to the mid-1970s, many religious and social conservatives, particularly of the Protestant religious orientation, would stay out of politics because their pastors would tell them, you know, the world is evil and politics is kind of the most underhanded, the most evil part of the world. You don't have to vote. But after Roe versus Wade in 1973, religious and social conservatives become increasingly active, and in a number of instances, they come to dominate state political machines. So pro-life is really what drives their agenda. And they already begin to flex their muscle very clearly by the late 1970s. So religious and social conservatives remain a huge part of the Republican establishment, of the Republican National Political Party. And then you have nativists. So nativists are people who prefer native culture. They say life should be about the culture that's already here. It should be about our music, our movies, our language, our neighborhoods, our fashions, our friends. And let's not have all these strange people from foreign lands taking our jobs and trying to interfere with the way we live, in some instances maybe even brazenly imposing their ways as the only right ways. Let's stick with what we already have. Let's preserve our culture, our language, our way of life. So nativism is something that kind of waxes and wanes in American politics. Sometimes it's stronger when it is a reaction toward a wave of immigration, and then sometimes it gets weaker when the number of first-generation immigrants as a percentage of population dwindles, and when the economy is prospering. So we see that with Donald Trump, there is an element of nativism and even xenophobia. So nativism and xenophobia are not exactly the same thing, but they are related. So xenophobia is fear of foreigners. And we see that Trump's program was not just about economics and the jobs, industrial jobs disappearing. It was also playing into these psychological motifs of it is foreigners who are taking our jobs, be it as a result of immigration or be it as outsourcing. So there is a little bit of a hint, if not targeting, of foreigners. And so nativism very clearly jibes with this kind of rhetoric. So nativists, as I said, are strong when you have waves of immigration. Very famously, the Know Nothing political party, which was strong in the 1850s, was a reaction against immigration, particularly a huge wave of Irish immigration. And in more recent times, with Donald Trump, we see that there's been a change in demographics. If in 1970, approximately 5% of the U.S. population were first-generation immigrants, then by 2016, that was almost 15%. So as a percentage of population, immigrants have tripled. And in fact, the population of the United States would have slightly declined without immigration, because after 1971, fertility rate has been lower than replacement, below replacement. Some say 2006, 2007 are exceptions. Maybe, I think in those years, they are about the same, that fertility rate is at replacement in those years. But in all other years, for the last 50 plus years, we see that more people in the United States actually die per year than are born. And yet population has grown dramatically, reaching approximately 340 million by 2024. And some project that the population will reach 400 million sometime between 2050 and 2060. So it's not a surprise that there was a pushback, and that people who were behind this pushback found their natural home in the Republican Party, because Democrats for a very long time now have been a party of immigrants, particularly poor immigrants. Democrats have had a wider, more cosmopolitan appeal, and nativists gravitated toward Republicans. So this is the Republican Party of today. Where will it go after Trump is anyone's guess, because much will depend upon which of these wings, which of these parts of the Republican Party will be ascendant. So we cannot predict with anything like scientific accuracy. If the global economy continues to move along, roll along, which appears less and less likely given recent events, but if the global economy actually prospers, then more traditional republicanism will be in ascendance, this older pro-business republicanism. But if the global economy continues to falter and we see more wars, regional conflicts, if not World War III, we may be on the brink of World War III already, then I think America First will become much more prominent inside the Republican Party. And nativists, as well as religious and social conservatives, will have the upper hand. So a lot depends on the events of the coming years, 24, 25, 26, will be crucial in terms of defining the identity of the Republican Party. Thank you.